Okay, welcome everybody to the SFU Sports Analytics Virtual Seminar Series, Episode 8. The SFU Sports Analytics Group is a group of faculty, students, and researchers on the SFU campus who share a passion for sports and the analytics behind them. So as part of our passion, or sharing our passion, we are hosting this virtual seminar series. And this week we have Justin Detlor, who's from Canadian Tire Financial Services. He's the manager of their sports analytics group. And he's going to talk to us today about supporting Canadian national sport organizations with data and analytics. So Justin is again the manager of the sports analytics team at Canadian Tire. He oversees the development and implementation of new analytical methodologies to assist Own the Podium and sport organizations in making data-driven decisions. Justin played a founding role in building the sports analytics team at the formation of the partnership between Own the Podium and Canadian Tire in 2015. So Justin joined the credit risk division at Canadian Tire as a senior analyst in 2011. Prior to joining Canadian Tire, he spent 3 years as a biostatistician in the pharmaceutical industry, focusing on clinical trial design. Justin began his career in the finance industry, joining compliance and internal audit with Wells Fargo Financial Canada. Justin holds a master's degree in statistics from the University of Guelph. So today, what he's going to speak about is the data and analytics partnership between Own the Podium and Canadian Tire Bank has been in existence since January 2015. This talk will focus on how Canadian Tire supports national sport organizations and Own the Podium in the areas of data acquisition, performance analytics, and data visualization tools. Specific examples of work in the area will be presented. Origins of the partnership, details in the workflow, and the operational model will be discussed. The talk will close with a look towards Tokyo 2021. So this is the second part of a 3-part series featuring people working in high performance sport in Canada. So a couple weeks ago, we had Phil Jeptovic. So he was the representative of a national sport organization. Justin represents the industry contractors that work in sports analytics. And then in 2 weeks' time, Dr. Ming Chang Sai will represent a member of the COPSI network, or the Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Sport Institute network, who is a performance data scientist within that network. So with that, I will turn it over to Justin. I will stop sharing my screen. And Justin, if you could please share yours, and I look forward to your talk.
All right, great. Thanks, Dave. Just give me 2 seconds here. All right, Dave, do I have the full slide up there?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, all right. That's not good. Give me a second here. All right, can you still see that? Still sharing?
Yep, looks good, Justin.
All right, thanks. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it the appropriate slide. All right, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for the introduction there, and yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today. Excited to take everyone through sort of the journey that our team has been on in partnership with Own the Podium over the last 5+ years. Yeah, I guess for the talk, so I'm not going to get too technical. So in the theme of Phil's talk last time, I'm going to cover a lot of ground in terms of what the team does, and so I won't get really deep into the technical information today. Again, like Dave said, if there's questions, feel free to throw them out there as we go through this. Yeah, with that, let's flip to the agenda. So want to hit sort of 4 main areas here. So kick things off with the background and the partnership, move into something that I think is important to touch on, and Dave has mentioned in the past, is the whole data side of the sports analytics work, right? Where does the data come from? What do we do for our data acquisition process, and how do we move that through to support the different sport organizations or I'll call them NSOs, National Sport Organizations is an acronym we use when talking about the different sport partners that we work with. Talk about some specific examples for the analytics and what we build for those sports, and then move into the visualization tools. And the last part, I'll just touch on sort of looking towards Tokyo 2021. All right, so this is kind of the highlight slide, right? So we'll start with the executive summary, right? So the overarching view of our team. So yeah, so our team, it's myself, it's 5 full-time analysts. We all kind of come to the table with a math stat background, and we have 3 co-op students that we bring in term by term, and they help support the work in those different areas that we talked about. So in terms of the data side, being at this for over 5 years, we've amassed quite a bit of performance results data. So managing over 135 million records. And in terms of the window of time, it goes all the way back to the original Olympic Games. So as you can imagine, the data that we have for the very first Olympic Games is not nearly as interesting or as deep as data we have from more recent events. But with that, we have 1.7 million unique athletes when you do the querying on that data. So it covers everything from Olympic Games, World Championships, all the way down from the senior events through to more national and regional events. But again, varies a lot by sport. On the analytics side, right, so what we do with the sports is we try and use different analytical approaches to answer questions and create insights for those sports. So everything from, basic summary statistics through to different machine learning methodologies that we apply. And again, baking that all together is layering the performance results data and the analytics into dashboards and visualization tools that the sports can use to really take advantage of that. So we do that with our Tableau Online platform, or cloud-based visualization platform. And I'll talk about that a bit later in the presentation. But the quick math on that is we have over 500 dashboards that have been developed custom for each sport based on their requirements. And the last point there is just really, the journey that we've been on is helping to work with sports and educate sports on the types of questions we can answer with the data that we have. So coming at it from the data scientist role and really supporting those sports on where we can go with the data and the analytics. So let me just touch a bit back on the background. We talked about in the intro there, the origin of the team, right? So how did this whole sports analytics thing get started at Canadian Tire, and how did the partnership come to be? So it really comes down to conversation that happened. I'm told this is the story of how it came to be. Conversation between John Furlong, who was the chair of on the Podium board of directors, and a conversation with one of our Canadian Tire senior executives back in 2014. And so just talking about how Canada really needed to move the needle on the use of data analytics, that Moneyball approach in Olympic sport. And John Furlong was envisioning, enriching the use of data and analytics there. So within that conversation, things trickled down on the Canadian Tire side, and that landed with my vice president, who said, we have this cool proof of concept that we want to work on and explore in 2014. And so over the course of 2014, worked on some initial objectives for a handful of sports. And at the end of 2014, stakeholders around the table were really happy with where things had gone. So that allowed us to enter into a formal partnership with Own the Podium and start building out the team and looking at which sports to engage with and help support. This whole partnership, I could say, fits really well within the Canadian Tire's overall mandate around, supporting kids in play through to being a premier partner of Canadian Olympic Committee and just supporting sport in general in Canada. All right, so how do we actually work with the sports, right? How does our team engage with the different sport organizations? So it's really driven by the oversight from on the Podium, right, in their assessment of the sport readiness. So in their conversations with the sport organizations, identifying are the right people in place to have that conversation around the adoption of analytics, to have the conversation around objectives and where we can go with supporting their programs. And so, when we do get to that point, right, we need to identify with the sport, what do those objectives look like and what questions are we trying to answer with the data that's available. So that analytics workflow, if we dig a little bit deeper on that, right, it's these three areas that I have up there that are really key to supporting the sports and how the partnership with On the Podium helps to move things along. Right, so collaboration, iteration, and innovation is what it comes down to. So it's not simply just a work plan with a set of objectives. We work through it, and then at the end of that, we present to the sport, and we're done. Have a nice day. Right, it's about regular touch points and update calls with the sports to update them on where the results of the analysis is going. So, within those update calls, right, it's an iterative process. We come to the table as data scientists, right? We're not experts in the sport details for those organizations we're working with. So it really requires input and feedback from the sport, but also from On the Podium, right, with their expertise at the table. So, we need to iterate through to what the analysis tells them and how they get those insights from the analysis. And, going a bit deeper there, right, it's about innovation. So, the first kick at the can may not completely answer the questions that the sports have, but, if we can be creative from the data scientist point of view and find the methodology or the approach that works, we can dig a bit deeper and innovate on how we answer those questions for the sports. All right, so I'm going to move into the data side now. So for folks that are curious about where all the data comes from, no, there is no database that we just connect to and execute a query, and we have a million records to play with. I think the concept of the whole, as a data scientist, 75% of your work is data prep is very valid when it comes to the sport analytics piece. So what I have up there is just this acquisition process that we put in place, right? And so this is all driven by the analysts on the team, right? Each analyst sort of runs with the ownership for the sports that they engage in. But this is the general process of what we do kind of start to finish to support the sports. So in terms of the acquisition process there, you can see it starts with identifying the data availability, right? So for our purposes, most of the time it's web-based performance results that we're interested in. Sometimes we'll get lucky and there'll be other sources available, but for the most part, we are executing the second step there, which is web scrapers that we build. We write the scripts for, we manage the automation of all of those scripts from those online data sources. Moving along through the process, right? Obviously, the data coming back in its raw form may not be exactly what we want it to look like. So we need to do that aggregation and transposition, and then move into that analytics stage. So calculate the custom performance metrics, run the data through, our different forecast and modeling analytics, and create the outputs we need to feed into the last part, which is the visualization of all of that information. So just to keep moving with the data thing, I wanted to highlight some of the data sources we have. So I'll just kind of quickly go through this here, but sort of 4 different areas that we get data from. So if we're really lucky, right, there'll be some sort of database that the sport organization has access to. maybe through their international federation. And so we can obtain credentials, execute queries, and pull back data in that way to run the analyses as well as maintain dashboards for updates. But again, that's far and few between. I would say that's definitely the exception rather than the norm. Next one is APIs, so online APIs. Sometimes the federation may have an API that we can execute queries against. Not as nice as an actual database in terms of pulling back larger chunks of data from the database, but at least with APIs, we can make calls and pull back structured data that we can work with. Moving down the list here, so as I talked about those web scrapers before, this is sort of the primary source of what we're working with. So it's generally unstructured data, but most of the time it's in a tabular format on websites. And we can use different types of coding approaches to get at that HTML data to structure it in the way that we want. And the last one, probably the hardest nut to crack here, is results posted in PDF files. So we do have scripts and technology to tackle that. And I'll touch on where it really gets challenging is when you end up working with a sport and they say, yeah, definitely we've got the data for all of those historical events. I'll just send you over the PDF files, right? And they send us stuff that looks like this, right? A photocopy from a scanned copy of something stored in some guy's basement from 10 years ago. So we encounter stuff like this. The challenge becomes, if you have 10, 20, 50, 100 PDF files where you need to get the data from those files in order to backfill your historical database, what do you do, right? So the latest and greatest technology that we've been using to tackle that is using cloud-based computer vision APIs. So we can push all of those PDF files up to the cloud, use the computer vision tools to analyze the PDFs and then recreate the data from those files. So quick visual there is an example, gymnastics data, and that's a screenshot of a PDF, which normally we couldn't get at through our regular tools, but using computer vision APIs, all the items in yellow there are identified as text from the analysis there, and we can extract that data. All right, so moving along on the data side here. So the question sort of becomes, that's great, you have scrapers for, 1, 2, 3, 5 sports, right? But what happens when you want to scale that into a system of data acquisition, right? How do you manage data sources across, let's say, 60 different summer sports, some summer and winter sports, as well as 28 different para sports, right? How do you do that? So that's where we're focusing efforts on now, going into 2021. And it's about creating a system to manage all of that custom scripting. I'll sort of move into that now, what that project looks like. So, the first thing is, what do 60 different data sources look like, right? So here's a fun slide, right? Here's a screenshot here of sort of all of the different international federation sites that we analyze and collect data from. So just, you think about each one of these icons has custom code that has to be developed, maintained, and adjusted when there are changes. So in terms of the acquisition piece there, let me just kind of walk through what this acquisition project looks like that we're moving towards. So again, it's about sort of systematizing the acquisition across all those data sources. So what we have there is all of those data sources, but now as we stand them up, creating some sort of front end orchestrator or script manager, right? And so we need feedback from the system to say, this passed, right? This ran successfully. This data was collected from the site, or there were errors, right? We didn't get a response. There's something wrong with the data that doesn't pass QA, or application of different data standards that we want to apply. So that's sort of the first first piece there, right? This again is all happening in the cloud. So when we do the initial pull, we need to work through that same part of the process I talked about before, but on a much larger scale. So manipulation and aggregation of data, applying QA checks to make sure we're not getting, garbage in, garbage out, as well as applying the performance metrics, the different analytical details, right, for each sport, as well as projections and forecasts. That all needs to live somewhere, right? So part of that is creating a centralized storage, or we'll call it a cloud-based data warehouse for all of the performance results across all those sports. And the last part, again, is feeding it into the tools so we can take advantage of all that information. So having it land in Tableau Online for on the Podium and the sport organizations to use. So that was all of the data components. Let's change gears here now and talk about some analytics, right? So I don't have as much in terms of analytics to go through because I think, like I said, I wanted to focus a lot on the data and the systematization of the collection of that, because I think it's one thing to have a static data set, but it's another thing to create a system where you have data flowing in and creating reports about how athletes are doing over the course of the season, how Canada is shaping up, looking towards the next Olympic Games, and so on. So yeah, with that said, let me just touch on some of the analytical work that we've been doing to support the sports. So that slide I have up there, right, is talking about sort of one of the main analytical tools in the suite of tools that we developed for sports. It's on the Podium's concept of what we call a podium pathway, right? So simply put, it's about using data from historic Olympic medalists and their performance trajectories, or the performance results in their careers leading up to that Olympic podium performance, right? So we use all of the historical data to smooth out a set of benchmarks that suggest an athlete should follow in the lead up to their podium performance. So in the visualization there, the chart is just sort of a theoretical example. Some of you may have seen this from prior talks, but it helps to illustrate sort of what we mean when we say an athlete is tracking to those podium pathway benchmarks or not tracking towards them. So just to quickly run through that, right, we're interested in the years out from that podium level performance. So year 0 in the chart there would be an Olympic Games. And we would track these two athletes, one in black, one in gold, as they're progressing. So the shaded area is, let's say, the cutoffs for their podium pathway benchmarks. And as their performance increases, right, i.e. their time decreases, 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years out, the two athletes are comparable. They're not hitting those pathway benchmarks as of yet, but at 5 years out, there's a marked change in the gold athlete, and their performance increases, time decreases, and they're now meeting those podium pathway performance benchmarks versus the black athlete, which isn't increasing their performance abilities at the same rate. So yeah, in other words, drawing that line in the sand and identifying where the athlete should track, right, and being able to measure and quantify what that looks like.
Justin, can I jump in and ask a couple questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks. So looking at the podium pathway, it's that grayed in area, and there's like a hard threshold, but like that, like the creation of that trajectory would have been from multiple Olympic medalists over, a number of years. Like, what is the uncertainty or the range, and how do you visualize that in an actual podium pathway? Like, I suspect there's probably like a pretty broad gray area around that hard threshold.
Yeah, absolutely. Like maybe if I flip to the next slide, I can answer that question with the practical example.
Certainly. Sorry to get ahead of you.
No worries. No, it's a good question, because I think it's important to highlight that, yeah, while that image that I was using is sort of the theoretical visual, right? But for the technical application, we always want to understand, yeah, what that variability or level of uncertainty looks like, right? And so with this slide, right, this is a practical example of the pathway development for Athletics Canada. So this is a snapshot of what they have in Tableau, and this is built on empirical calculations of past athlete performances. And to answer your question, Dave, so the different lines in there are showing the estimated value or the calculated value, as well as like a +1 or a +2 standard deviations. So it gives the sport kind of a set of gradations in terms of that variability to understand really what the gap is, right, and what that level of uncertainty looks like. Does that answer your?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at these data carefully here. This looks really interesting. So looks like you have finalists, and then there's like a breakdown of not just the medalists, but a number of different stages of accomplishment, I guess.
Yeah, and it's something that when you look at a tool like this, it's been built by an analyst on our team. It applies in different areas. So for this example, right, with that red circle or the red oval there, right, it's about looking at what the gap or the surplus is for senior level athletes as they approach, the next Olympic Games. But on the flip side, it could also be evaluating next gen athletes, right, and where they're landing with their more recent performances on the far end of the curve, right? If they are, in the next gen category, right, and they may not be targeting directly the next Olympic Games, but with a little bit further out, right, for the following quad, what that looks like.
Great, thanks.
So yeah, just we talked about sort of some specifics here. So maybe just to close this out, right? So again, the curves in the dashboard there, right? It's built on a huge amount of data, right? We're looking at roughly 20 years of performance data to make those calculations. And as I touched on, the whole collaboration and iteration, right? So this was developed in partnership with the high performance director, Simon Nathan at Athletics Canada. And so coming into the discussion, right, he's obviously has a wealth of experience working internationally, with Athletics Australia, UK Athletics. And so being able to tailor the tools to get at the approach and answer those questions that Simon would have on evaluating his athletes and their performance levels. Yeah, and so along with that, like this next slide here is just sort of a bit of a plug, right, in terms of the impact, but it's sort of testimonial from Simon, and what I want to highlight here is just it's always important for our team to understand sort of the integration of the work into the programs, because we can do a static analysis, but we always need to be sort of asking, what's the impact of the analysis, right? How does it integrate into the program that the sport is putting together, right? Because in the past, we've had questions around. I've always wondered if this was the case, and we have the wealth of data to answer the question, but in the past we've worked through that and we've said, okay, here's the answer. Now, what are you going to do with it? And it's like, well, we actually can't change anything, because that's how the competition is structured and the rules are set so that we have no input there, right? And it's like, okay, that's great, but we want to be targeted and we want to be efficient with how we derive the answers to those questions and what the insights are. So yeah, we want to make sure that what we build for the sports is going to generate value. All right, let's keep rolling along here. So the next analytics piece that I want to talk about is all of the body of work that we've done with Swimming Canada. And so Swimming Canada, as a sport organization, we've been partnering with them since the creation of the team. So they were one of the sports we started working with in 2014. And we're fortunate that the analyst we've had on the team has been working with them for the entire time that we've been partnered with them. So it's been quite the evolution in terms of the work. And what I have there is just sort of 3 different areas that we've kind of built analytics as we've gone. So on the left there, right, the initial work that we started with was around age-based performance analysis, right? And so building out what we call age curves to help understand expected progression of athletes age by age and what that looks like. And so it's built on, a couple million data points. And this helped to answer sort of peak age performance questions, rate of improvement, and help to plot specific athletes and what their expectations look like over the next few seasons. So from there into the second portion, right, those age curves help to craft what Swimming Canada calls their on-track times. And so these were built post Rio using the analytics, and these are publicly available. They're posted on the Swimming Canada website. And the cool thing is it really helps to find sort of the diamond in the rough, right? So having those posted times, athletes can track their performances and identify sort of where they fit in terms of track 1, 2, 3 by age. And if there is an athlete, in rural Manitoba that's meeting these performance times, Swimming Canada can identify based on those thresholds, right, and target those athletes. So very cool to see the evolution of that trickle down into the public facing on track times. And the last piece there
Sorry,
is,
Justin, can I just interrupt quickly? What are the 3 tracks? So it looks like track 3 is your sort of a later mature versus an early mature in track 1. Is that fair to say?
yeah, I think my understanding is they're based on sort of different targets, right, of where you're targeting. So like, targeting like Olympic finalist time, a semifinalist time, a participant time. But yeah, so they're built with different gradations, right? And as you can see there in the screenshot, my understanding is like athletes can age out, right, of the on-track time. So ideally they've hit a certain performance threshold by the time there's a certain age, right, in order to progress up to the senior team level.
Gotcha. Great, thanks.
So then the last one there is just taking the earlier analytics, right, and advancing into more complex machine learning predictive analytics. So creating targeted predicted times for individual athletes looking towards future Olympic Games, right? So for Tokyo 2021, using tools like XGBoost to create those individual predicted times and helping to bake in earlier analytics, right? So just the age curve performance analytics. So, that XGBoost piece, obviously there's a lot of input variables. If I'm remembering correctly, there's about 80 plus input variables that would go into that analysis. But again, don't want to get too deep into the details given the amount of time we have. So yeah, that's Swimming Canada. Again, 5+ years of working with them. It's really cool to see the progression and the evolution of the work there. All right, let me switch into the next piece here, right, which is visualization tools. So I want to touch on, dig a bit deeper into what I talked about earlier around Tableau Online. So our cloud-based delivery of it, data and analytics. So what I have there is a screenshot of the Tableau Online site, right? This is our view, so we can see everything that's going on, but you can see the all of the different icons there, and they're representative of the different project folders we have for the sports that we're working with. So when a sport logs in, they only see their respective folder. We manage all of the licensing and permissions, security, and so on. So if there are personnel changes, we can adjust those, right? If there are additional personnel within the sport that want access to specific things, but management would like to sort of slice and dice what's available, we can do that as well. But suffice to say that all of the visualizations that are in there are developed by our analysts. They're built within Tableau Desktop, right, the development side of Tableau, and they're all custom or bespoke dashboards. So we present those to the sports. They provide feedback. Any adjustments or tweaks needed, we can take those away and implement to support a refined set of visualization tools and dashboards for the sports. So one thing to touch on is where we're going with the whole stitching together of all of that performance data and Tableau Online for Own the Podium. This is an internal project that we're working on, but we call it sort of our global reporting initiative. And that's helping Own the Podium report on winter and summer, para and able-bodied sports as the seasons are happening. So you think about combining all of the up-to-date data as events are happening throughout a season. We can collect that data, process it, load it to Tableau, and then after the weekend competitions has happened, Own the Podium can log in and review what those performance results look like, as well as how that impacts total counts on podiums, top fives, top tens, and so on, right? So it gives Own the Podium the ability to take a revised snapshot of the health of Canada's athletes and their competition performance results as the season's ongoing. And so that all feeds together. So we started on the winter side simply due to numbers, right? Obviously less sports to manage in terms of that acquisition process. And now we're in the process of working through all of those summer sports as part of that acquisition cloud project. And I guess the other thing to mention here, right, is just the global reporting initiative is just anything from raw results through to specific metrics that Own the Podium is interested in looking at, right, and in comparison to other nations. So let me keep going with the Tableau Online. So I got a couple examples here to touch on. So this is one dashboard, relatively new, that analysts on the team has put together. And this is for all of the work that we've done with curling. So we've been working directly with Curling Canada, and we have a counterpart at Curling Canada who has a background in math, but is also a former curler at the Scotties level. So it's been very exciting for us to partner there and have someone who gets the math side, but also understands the nuance of the game as well. And so for this dashboard, what you're looking at is, so it's a breakdown of sort of the shot types that we have in the data by athletes on specific teams. So within the Curling Canada data there, just noted on the left. So we're working with over 35,000 games, over 600,000 shots. And so we've created sort of different performance metrics that can assess the shot performances and the game performances of our both Canadian athletes and international athletes, while normalizing for things like ice conditions, tournament level, and so on, a bunch of different factors there. So in the visualization, what we're doing is we're looking at the number of shots athletes are taking in combination with the performance level of those shot types, and then breaking it down across those different athletes. So yeah, we could spend another 20 minutes talking about all the different things that you can do here, but the one point I want to make is, to me, what's really cool is our counterpart at Curling Canada can sit down with senior men's and women's teams and review these details And the simplicity of the dashboard and the way it's laid out in combination with the athletes, memory for their performance levels, the athletes can actually start to tease out where the strengths and weaknesses are in their game. And so to me, to distill down the analytics and all of the performance data to that level, to have that conversation is very cool. And it's sort of one of the goals of where we've been trying to get to. All right. So this is the last slide I have for visualization tools. It's another one I want to touch on. And this one, again, this is sort of a tool to allow the coaches and the athletes to sort of interact and use data in a way to help craft that conversation on the day of training or on the day of camp. And so this example is sort of driven around our work with ski cross. And basically what it is around sort of daily training as well as the camp training. But basically what we're attempting to do here is we have input forms that the athletes can use to enter details around health and wellness, right? So energy levels, soreness levels, sleep details, and so on, as well as, maybe camp specific stuff that they're capturing around day-to-day performances. And so the athletes can input that first thing in the morning, right? Their health and wellness details. That can flow through in the system. In the visual there, it's Google Forms, Google Sheets, into our storage system, and then outputted to Tableau Online. That all happens. It's all scheduled for a 15-minute refresh, I believe. And so what you see there in the end is a mobile set of Tableau dashboards that the coaches can be looking at first thing in the morning for those camp discussions. So they can quickly identify input details for a specific athlete and craft the discussion or the questions they want to use to engage with that athlete and help set up the day for success and what the athlete has plans. So very cool to see how we can turn that data around. We can analyze it, present it to the right people at the right time, and help drive the discussions. All right, last slide I got here is just looking towards Tokyo 2021, right? So where are we focused, over the next 8 or 10 months? So, should be no surprise, right? We're focused on those data components, right? Global reporting, developing additional analytics to help support those sports. I have there as well building out other types of analysis tools, right? So performance probabilities, medal estimation, really assessing Canada's ability going into Tokyo 2021, and rolling up all of that data for the Podium as well as other stakeholders. That's everything I have. So yeah, just want to say thanks again to Dave for the opportunity. Very cool to share the details that our team has been working through over the last 5+ years. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Justin. That was great. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor to questions. Let's start by looking at the chat forum here. So I noticed that there's a couple that I might have missed during the talk. I apologize for that. So you can ask, and I'll add to the question. So are there key factors like injuries that influence the podium pathways? And what I would add to that is, are there I think doping would be like the major, cheating or major equipment advances, like things that are outside of the control of or that could really skew the data. How do you accommodate that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a good question. So kind of break it into some different parts there, right? So let me start with doping because that's a common one. So what I'll say is like we've done prior and past analysis for sports on doping, right? So in the past, athletics, you think about going into Rio, that was a big thing. And so with the type of data we were able to get our hands on around, lists of known dopers, right? Because obviously the analysis with doping, you never know who's doping until they're actually been identified. So you need to do it sort of historically. What we found in the analysis is that, like, one, overall in terms of the athlete population, it's a very small percentage. And two, it's not necessarily, at least from what we saw in the data, it's not, the athletes that are in the top 3, top 5 that are doping, right, to go from a top 5 to a podium. It's the athletes that are doping that are trying to go from a top 20 to a top 10, right? So, that's at least what we've seen in terms of the doping piece. But again, trying to bake in, athletes that are doping at the current time, unless they've been properly identified, that's a tough one to address. So equipment, what I'll say there is, like, there are nuances in terms of the equipment details, right? In alpine sports, right? We talk about waxing, obviously other, like, technology advances. What I'll say is what we try and do with some of that is we use performance metrics that standardize for different aspects of that, right? I touched on the curling and using normalization approaches to tackle that. So, it's definitely something that the sports bring up, right? And they want to try and bake into the analytics. So, definitely trying to use different approaches to tackle that kind of thing.
Okay. Is it possible that is it possible to give a specific example of, like, how you would, so, like, let's take swimming as an example, where they had suits, the laser type suits that were legal for, I think, about an 8-year period, and certainly the swimmers in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but there was a block of time where those were legal. The times, dropped dramatically. The world records, were smashed in many cases, and then they went back to the normal suits. Like, how specifically would you accommodate that?
Sure. Maybe I'll give you a quick example. So, our analyst that's been working with swimming. So when we were first building out our V1 of the pathways, we were using sort of a mixed modeling approach, right? And so obviously, when we're looking at those athletes' career trajectories going backwards in time. So if you think about athletes who are on the podium for Beijing 2008 and the lead up there, for the appropriate quads where those swimsuits would overlay, we would want to create the proper coding and parameterization and mixed modeling, right, to account for any effects that we saw in the swimsuits and the contribution there. So, to your question, trying to tease out the effects of things like the laser swimsuits in the data, right?
So was that a fixed effects term in the mixed effects model? And if it was, do you know what do you remember what the estimate for that coefficient was? Like, how much faster did those suits actually make the athletes?
No.
Too bad. Okay, I'm going to move on here to questions. So the next one is from Tim Winooski. So Tim, I'm going to ask you to unmute your mic and to ask your question by voice to Justin, please.
For sure, yeah. Hey, Justin.
Hey.
So I'm a ex-swimmer. So I'm on the SFU swim team, and I just quit recently because of the coronavirus. And so a lot of my work I've been doing in the past little while has been automating the collection of data for swimming. So I have a couple questions regarding your Swim Canada page, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah.
First of all, do you feel like you can answer questions from that particular, like in that particular field?
Give it a shot.
All right. So I guess my first question was, do you, shoot, what did I say on my message to you? I can't remember.
I will. So, what data points make up
Yeah,
the on-track path?
for sure. Yeah. So what data points make up the on-track path that you showed in that slide? Do you remember?
Do you mean like with respect to the actual performance times?
So when you take a swimmer and you look at them, what data points determine whether or not they're on track?
So I would say, like, first and foremost, we would say is personal best. But yeah, don't quote me on the actual analysis of an athlete's performance against the on-track times. Like I would say, not to cop out, but have a look at the Swimming Canada website, because they have documentation there on how to evaluate an individual swimmer, right, on how they're performing.
So what you're saying is it's exclusively just time, right?
It's time. Well, time and age, yes.
Time and age. Yeah, my bad. Sorry. All right. Cool. I think I remember looking at these on track times when I was swimming. They had them posted at the training center in Victoria, and there's a lot of competitions there. I personally am not a huge fan of them. No offenses or anything. I think they have still a long way to go. And I'd just like to know if there's anything any data point that you think would increase like the on-track ability of these things, like their ability to find the diamond in the rough.
Yeah, like, so what I could say right now is the on-track times, to be fair, like the methodology is about 5 years old, right? So, it's not as refined maybe as what's in development more recently. And so, just briefly, like we have ongoing work with Swimming Canada to try and tease out, across 30, 40, 50 different variables, what are key markers or key indicators for senior success as a junior athlete.
All right. Well, that's awesome. I think that's where we need to go for that. I just wanted, where do you get that data then?
So it's primarily just within all the data that's been collected. So, it's off the top of my head, there's FINA, Swim Rankings is another site.
Yep.
Yeah, so those are the big ones.
Mostly just post times and splits. They don't post anything else, as far as I know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's athlete biographies and so on, but.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, how could I contact the person who works with swimming analytics in your team? Would I be allowed to? Sorry, this is a bit of a personal question, probably off topic.
Yeah. Right, so why don't we, Tim? I can put you in touch with Justin, and maybe that we can deal with this offline if you have more questions, because we have lots of questions in the chat room we'd like to get through to. So
sorry.
No, it's fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I was going to suggest the same. Yeah, let's chat offline.
I'm going to turn it over to Robin Ritchie, who had a couple of questions in the chat forum. Robin, if you could just unmute and ask your questions directly to Justin, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hi. Sorry, just going to scroll to my question. So in their analytics, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Do they track like other major countries to use as comparisons, and do you use their data to kind of influence where Canada is moving towards, and how do you kind of use that data to compare if you do?
So generally speaking, so we use all like Canadian and international performance results. So we want to use how any athlete that has landed on the Olympic podium has progressed to that point. And then, to extend that right to the second part is with the analytics, we obviously want to overlay the current international athletes and as well as the Canadian athletes and understand what that looks like in comparison.
Okay, thank you. And I really enjoyed your talk, especially the curling part. I've been curling for 20 years and love statistics. So that's like the dream job I'm looking for. So I was wondering, do you track things like optimal decision making? So like in curling, there's a lot of trust in the skip that they make the right decision and the right call all the time. So I was wondering how you can kind of evaluate like that human component, like are they making the right choice at the right time? Like do you track that or monitor anything like that?
Like with respect to curling?
Yeah, curling specifically. Or other sports that kind of have more of like a human like judgment call, I guess. Do you have any way of tracking those kinds of things? Did they make the right decision? Like at a certain curling time, should I hit or should I freeze? Like those kind of strict decisions that can change the game.
Yeah. So, so what I'll say there is, like I'm not the analyst that's done all of the detailed work with Curling Canada, right? So he's the expert on our team for sure. But at my level, what I'll say, and I think it should work, is with the analytics that we have built, we can evaluate sort of the different options in terms of going for 1, 2, 3 points and so on. And we can look critically and say when they went for 3 instead of maybe playing the safer shot for 2, the overall outcome and what that means to the overall level of success or win probability didn't really change all that much. So in other words, they were taking a more risk and a larger chance for not as much gain, right? So that helps in to understand if the right decision is made, right, at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And then more generally speaking, like, we've done analysis on judge sports. And so, looking at just generally speaking, like how Canadian athletes are favored or not favored, or are Canadian judges too lenient or not lenient enough? Just understanding what the overall picture looks like, and the judging performances, right? Bias analysis, essentially.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Excellent, thanks. So next question is from Josh Gorham. And Josh, if you're still on, do you want to unmute and ask Justin your question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. My question's a little bit less statistical, and it's more around the creation of the questions, the research questions, or the questions that you decide to answer. Is it the HPD of the NSO, like the National Sport Organization, or is it like an advisor from Own the Podium asking the questions? And on the second half of that, how much influence do coaches have or sports scientists have in developing those questions?
So for the first part, it's both, I guess, right? So at our engagement meetings, our regular check-in meetings, it can be a mix of, the high performance director from the sport organization, the head coach. It could be the sports science folks. It could be folks from the different CSIs, right, from the COPSI network, as well as on the Own the Podium side, it's my counterpart, Paul Dorotich. I think he's on as well, and the high performance advisor from the Own the Podium side. So it's a mix there.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, what was the second part? The coach side, I guess. I guess it kind of covered that, but yeah, like it can evolve it's really on I think on the Podium, the sports side, to identify the appropriate parties. But yeah, we work with coaches for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Josh. So the next question is from Dr. Jonathan Tremblay at the University of Montreal.
Hi, Justin. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I worked for many years with the amateur sports, so it's interesting that the OTP is, supporting this kind of initiative. I'm just surprised, based on my experience with OTP and coaches in general and HPDs, the general, typically, to interpret performance variations, there's a general lack of understanding of uncertainty and biases in understanding performance in general. So you mentioned, I think, in one of your first slides that one of your roles is actually to educate around these topics as well. So I'm just wondering, because in none of your slides I think we could see variations or uncertainty in the slides. So I'm wondering, how much can you educate the coaches and OTP staff on interpreting the results that you have and the data that you provide, actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a valid observation, right? I didn't put much up there that had error bars on it, for sure. And that's part of the discussion that we have with the sports, right? So definitely where it's appropriate, right? When we do get into sort of the estimation techniques, we need to be clear on what the variability looks like for the empirical pieces, right? Or simply just, this is all of the data that we've collected historically for the last 10 plus years. We do the empirical calculation for this athlete based on all of the shots. This is the value, right? So definitely, like, we have to make sure the sports are interpreting the analytics and the information appropriately. So yeah, it's a valid point.
But just to follow up, Justin, it's just that, let's say, for example, when you compare medalists versus non-medalists in pole vault performance, and the curves really follow each other really well, and there's just a slight difference between the two curves. I'm just, because I know from my experience that the coaches would say, well, there's a clear difference between medalists and non-medalists there, but we don't know about the uncertainty. So it's probably within the uncertainty to explain those performances. So I'm just wondering, how bad interpretations could come out of these plots sometimes, and how dangerous that could be in some cases for some coaches that don't have a lot of knowledge around these topics.
Yeah, definitely. I think like one of the common comments that we have on update calls, right, is trying to dig deeper in the data and basically, providing some caution on, really we're limited in the amount of data that we have as we start slicing and dicing to try and answer those questions. So for sure, like the athletics one that we had up there, right, around like the +1, +2 standard deviations. It's sort of things like that where we're trying to identify, what the margin of error is, right, and not sort of jumping to conclusions to say like, oh, look, this value is different from this value, when statistically, we really consider them as the same, right?
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. The next question is from David Hill from the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. David, if you could unmute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Very similar to Jonathan's last question around the variability, but and how we generate it. I think certainly the value that Canadian Tire is producing for the NSOs is at the top end when it becomes highly competitive to determine what it would take to achieve a result that would win a medal. And there is a ceiling effect on human performance. But as we know, as we get further down the pathway, there's a huge amount of variability in how athletes are performing. So my question was, how do you account for individual athlete variation in performance, particularly when athletes are approaching a ceiling effect of human performance?
Yeah, it's a good question. So maybe I'll start with sort of the first part of your comment, right? So yeah, as we work backwards, X number of years out from that Olympic, podium level performance, what I didn't really get into was the whole funnel aspect of how that tracks, right? So yeah, definitely realizing that the amount of variability in the peak level of performances 1 year out from the Olympics is much different than the amount of variability at 6 or 8 years out, right? It really creates this huge funnel where at 8 years out, it's a huge window where those medal performance athletes where they would fall, right, in terms of 8 years out. But yeah, I think what I didn't show was some, the different visualization tools that help capture what that funnel shape looks like, and helping the sport to see what the progression of the funnel is to that, 2 years out, 1 year out, 0 year out, right, and what that variability looks like right at the end of the pathway. So, for sure, what you're saying is accurate, and we have to identify what that looks like, right, 1 year out or 0 years out, the year of the Olympic Games.
And then just the other part of that question, because I think if you're looking at data, there's only one winner, if you will, or a very high standard of time. You can't go beyond that. So I'm just wondering how the variability is handled at the very, very top end when you're pushing up against a ceiling of actual human performance.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we're necessarily trying to predict the top end of what that human performance looks like, but yeah, it's true that as you get to the peak level, and what we've seen in the age curves, right, that there is that diminishing returns, right, as an athlete is approaching the front end of the pack. We try and some of the work we do is using sort of a distributional approach, right? So long tail, but realizing that, there is that sort of upper limit in terms of how the performances will progress out based on the end of that distributional tail.
Well, that's great. Thanks. It's just great to try and even understand that, but it's beyond my comprehension. But yeah, no, but it's good that you're it's being recognized within all the data.
Yeah, so great question. I think that's probably some of these could be answered with more specific examples. Obviously, Justin's talk was quite high level, but I think in some of the curves, they're still trending upwards too, right? I'm not sure that we've hit. I mean, I think conceptually we think we're hitting the ceiling of human performance, but the data might say otherwise if there's not an actual leveling off of performance. And then also then that would be in CGS type sports, so ones that are having an objective measure of results. But in rankings aren't going to reflect necessarily the ceiling of performance either. So, okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and this is I'm just going to sort of a technical question, but what are your favorite models that you guys use for the podium pathway, to model the actual trajectories? And so can you talk about different types of models that are used for CGS type objective measured sports, and then ones for ordinal data like rankings? And are rankings used alone for certain sports?
Yeah, so I guess the first part, I kind of touched on that, but just generally speaking in terms of the statistical application, yeah, so it's sort of a combination of so I mentioned mixed models, right? A lot of it is sort of nonlinear modeling approaches there. So we've done some transformation regression, right? Sometimes there's been questions from the sport saying, well, does this pathway reflect, what the age of athlete the age of the athlete actually is, right? So, maybe the progression to the pathway is different for an 18-year-old versus a 24-year-old, right? So there's that. So the second part, yeah, absolutely. We try and create sort of different lenses in terms of pathway progression, not just simply looking at ranking, but where other performance metrics will work. We can apply a modeling approach there and create a set of pathway benchmarks using other metrics, right? So actual performance times, normalized performance metrics, shooting metrics, and so on. So yeah, I think it's important to give the sport sort of a couple different or a number of different lenses to evaluate their athletes on, especially different aspects of the competition, right? If a sport competition is sort of multifaceted, right? It's not simply just how fast are you on this equipment when there's other parts of the competition that you need to be good at.
Thanks for that clarification. So I'm going to just stop the formal questioning right now, and I'm going to thank Justin very much for a great talk, giving us an overview of all the interesting work that Canadian Tire Bank has done for the Canadian sports system in the last 5 years. Seems like it's been a lot of progress that's been made, and it's really great to see come to life. I think a lot of members of the academic audience were used to analyzing the single data sets, for a long time, but in sport, this concept of the feedback cycle is very important, where as you collect data, you're providing the sport, rapid updates in ways that they can actually use them. And that's a different skill set sometimes than what we're used to. So thanks a lot for that. That was really informative. And I'm just going to stop the recording now. And just for those of you, Justin, are you okay to stick around for another 10 minutes or so just to engage in some discussion? There's still quite a few people online who might be interested in asking some off-recording questions.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Okay, thanks for attending, everyone, and we will see you in a couple of weeks' time.